Section 7 of the Daredevil of the Army. Experiences as a buzzer and dispatch rider by Austin Patrick Corcoran. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4, in which the wireless comes into its own on the British front. Part 1. It was during the Battle of Loos that some gentleman, entitled to think only important people have that privilege in the army, decided it was high time that the British forces took advantage of Mr. Marconi's invention. True, wireless had not been unknown in the world military. Indeed, its introduction there practically coincided with its debut in civil life. But so far, the appointed controllers of the Signal Service destinies had looked on the interloper with disfavour. They preferred the time-honoured method of the regular telephone, which had weathered so many a test, but which, alas, collapsed so often in a crisis. Our friend Fritz, on the contrary, had shown no such tender prejudice. Always the leader in military fashions, he had been using the wireless telephone from the very start in his communications, and always, presumably, with excellent results. Wherefore it was decreed to offer him the delicate compliment, than which there is none more delicate or sincere, of imitating him in this particular line. So at Loos we started, also with excellent results, whence hangs the rest of our tale. Justified by the experiment, the aforesaid gentleman or his friends decided to elaborate and extend the new system, thereby initiating a minor revolution in the methods of the Royal Engineer Signal Service. Immediately there went forth a call for qualified men for the work. Post officers, private wireless companies, telegraph officers were combed for operators already familiar with the intricacies of the Morse code or the rudiments of the more necessary radio work. The small schools which had formerly turned out the insignificant body of army operators were enlarged beyond all expectation. A new curriculum was chosen and a new standard set, calling for very definite and very high qualifications on the part of the graduates. The new army operator had to be able to send and receive the Morse code at the rate of 25 words a minute English or 20 words code and foreign languages. As a matter of fact, 15 was about as rapid as he could use, though he might need 20 in times of particular stress. No chances, however, were taken in the matter of speed. Then he had to be able to assemble and dismantle a standard Marconi set. He had to be able to hoist and strike steel aerial poles. He had to have a working knowledge of a trench set and a thorough knowledge of army procedure. This course took him anywhere from 2 to 3 months to cover, according to his native ability and the extent of his previous knowledge. That knowledge, indeed, was usually small, for the average Englishman had seldom indulged in these semi-scientific studies. His American cousin, with his natural aptitude for these abstruse subjects, is far ahead of him here. Indeed, judging by a short but close connection with radio sections of the American Army which I have had since my advent in the United States, I should be inclined to predict that in this branch of the service the American boy will beat all comers. Still, allowing for this general innate disinclination, few Britishers would not prefer a bayonet to a wireless box, Our schools did rapid and efficient work. Soon qualified men were pouring over to France. Meantime, behind the firing line, we were preparing officers to receive them. All signal officers who could be spared from brigade and division headquarters, and who, of course, were already familiar with telegraphy and circuits, were sent behind the line for a 3 weeks' course which would give them sufficient knowledge of the work to enable them to command a radio section, until regular radio officers were ready to take their places. And every officer on the line who showed any knowledge of wireless was brought back to act as instructor in the new schools. During my short stay at the depot in England, I had confessed in an incautious moment to having done some wireless work in school. Now I was to reap the consequences of my indiscretion. In the army, as in the law courts, everything you say can be used against you. Besides, I was still a Cook's tourist, with no fixed abiding place, so presently I found myself departing from my small command with a ticket for General Headquarters way back beyond the line. St. Omer was the nearest station, but my billet was at Roquetoire, in a chateau, which housed the school as well as the scholars. Here our work was conducted with that apparent absence of effort which seems to characterise all activities in the environment of the High Command. In the morning we went on excursions, always carrying our little wireless sets with which we experimented in the pleasantest spots to be found in the surrounding country. Or we had rather informal discussions on elementary electrical subjects which were never prolonged beyond 3:30 in the afternoon. After that hour our time was our own, to be disposed of according to our inclinations. Were it not for the omnipresence of certain red-tabbed gentlemen, in whose presence discreet behaviour was advisable, this period might have marked a high water mark in the way of amusements. St. Omer was a pleasant place, and quite close when one possessed a motor cycle, but those red-tabbed gentlemen and the generals they surrounded were very numerous on its crooked old streets, too numerous from the point of view of a mere subaltern. Still, one can't expect unalloyed delights. At least the guns were far distant. They no longer disturbed our sleep, and the beds boasted clean linen, and there was hot water for our baths. And we ate our meals off a dining table, and never extracted them from a can. Indeed, on the whole, we had reason to be grateful to the gentleman above mentioned, who not only possessed but used his privilege of individual thought. It was not long before the wireless system, developing with that miraculous rapidity which characterises all developments in a modern fighting army, had established itself as an important, not to say indispensable, part of every section of the British forces in France. In the trenches, with the guns, on the aeroplanes, at headquarters, in short, everywhere, the radio had its definite place and different form according to the exigencies of the position assigned to it. During the Great Retreat, its role with the infantry was practically monopolised by a few motor lorry sets which, though small, had played a significant part. To the casual observer these are no more than ordinary trucks, the bodies of which are limited by the small space of 12 feet by 6. As a matter of fact, they are extraordinarily compact and ingenious contrivances, an entrance to which is effected from the rear. Looking in from here, one sees at the far end a bench about 3 feet high by 4 feet deep, above and below which are placed complicated instruments, recognisable only to the initiated. Along the sides of the truck run lockers about 18 inches high by 18 deep, in which are neatly stowed various poles of various lengths to be taken out as occasion requires. Underneath the truck is stored another set of these poles, for this can be used either as a mobile or fixed station, and different requirements demand different apparatus. One might imagine that all this paraphernalia would take up all the small available space. Not so, however. There were still 2 operators to fit in, one for receiving and transmitting the messages, the other for logging, filing and distributing. This latter function was discharged usually by orderlies, 4 or 5 of whom, as a rule, followed outside on bicycles. Whenever a message had to be delivered to a commanding officer within the truck's sector, one of these men rode off with it, a very easy job compared with that of the men inside the truck. Quiet, you know, is considered essential for an operator's work as a rule, but quiet was the last thing these operators could hope to have. To being with, there was the incessant noise from the automobile engine, then there was the continual bumping over the uneven French roads. Lastly, there was the roar of the guns in the distance, and not the dim distance either, very often. There was an operator once whose truck was hit by a shell. A flying splinter from the wagon caught him in the foot, but he stuck to his job, though in terrible pain. How could he leave it, with no relief nearby? I don't know how long it was before that relief finally came, but there was another man whose relief failed him for some 39 hours. From 7 o'clock one morning until 10 the next night, he sat in his wagon in his horribly cramped position, never taking the phones from his ears. A Superman, if you will. There were many of them in those days, the early days, the dark days, when one man did the work of many, when we were fighting an army of fully equipped millions with only thousands to hold them off. Days that are gone, thank heaven, for good. But to come back to our motor lorry wireless sets. With the finish of the moving fighting, they went temporarily out of use. Trench wireless apparatus became the great need now. The old telephone was good, but so long as communications depended on cable that a chance shell might at any moment cut, so long were the communications undependable and therefore dangerous. A portable wireless for front line use that a single man could carry, that would not be a tempting target for machine gun fire, that would not be easily disabled even by the bursting of a shell, that was the instrument which the experimenters aimed at. And it was evolved by slow degrees. In its final form, which it did not assume till some months later, it consisted of a box 18 inches by 9, weighing just 15 pounds and having a range easily of 5 miles. I remember when the first experiments were made with this set, some distance back of the line. They took the form of contests between the wireless and the old telephone. A detachment of each would start off from a trench, as if during an actual engagement, to a position some 500 yards off. Then each would do his utmost to establish communications in the shortest possible time. The men, being on their mettle, did their best, but from the first the wireless man won, usually by an average of some 30 seconds, no small consideration in actual warfare, when perhaps it is a question of holding conquered ground against strong resistance. The instrument being thus perfected and the operators trained, the wireless telephone took its place on the line. Now when the Tommy advances to an attack, there is always a radio man somewhere in the rear. Where formerly a detachment had to reel out hundreds and hundreds of yards of cable to establish telephonic communication between the new positions and the old, now an operator picks up his box and his aerial and advances simultaneously with the attackers. Arrived, he crouches in a nearby crater, throws out his aerials along the ground, and establishes communications forthwith. The infantry is gaining. He follows right along. The infantry is retreating. He beats it back behind them. So has the wireless simplified matters along the line. With the air service it is, naturally, of infinitely more importance. Here, however, it was always in use, being essential to the success of the work. The aviator has been called the eyes of the army, but if those eyes lacked a mouth through which to tell what they have seen, they would often be just as useful if blindfold. Suppose a spotter has gone up to locate an enemy battery that has been creating havoc along our line. Suppose he locates it, a difficult business in these days of effective camouflage. Naturally it is out of sight both for our guns and their forward observation officers. It is the spotter's business then to give our artillery the range and direct their fire. This he does by means of his wireless apparatus. Having given them the approximate distance, he signals down, "Go!" They fire. It is a cloudy day, and they use high explosive which, giving out a yellowish puff, is undistinguishable to the airman's eye. Back he signals, "Shrapnel." This gives out a white cloud of smoke. They fire again. He sees it, but the shot goes over the target and a couple of 100 yards to the right. By means of a code he tells them the approximate distance by which they have missed. They fire again, somewhat nearer, but not yet right. He signals again. They shift their range according to his instructions. So it continues until, finally, he flashes the letter Z. In artillery parlance, they have hit. And this is only one detail of the work the air wireless does. It is invaluable for the aviator's operations. But we have not yet reached the end of the radio's activities. Back at Army Headquarters, where enemy shells do not often fall, the aerial raises a high and honoured head. Here is situated a large Marconi station, the chief duties of which are the intercepting of enemy communications and the taking of aircraft reports. With this, too, are connected smaller sets at Brigade, and so on up to the trenches, where they ultimately get in touch with our tiny portable boxes. Thus does wireless as well as cable telephone link up the whole line. There was a captious gentleman once who complained that much activity was wasted by this chain of ever greater sets of wireless apparatus. Why not, he asked, replace them all by one large set close to the line, which could link them all up at once with General Headquarters in the rear? Much time, he argued, could thus be saved. His suggestion was adopted. I remember the occasion quite distinctly. The station was erected. It consisted of a motor lorry set, 1½ kilowatts, a 120-foot steel mast, an umbrella aerial, with a complement of 3 operators. For 2 hours it reared its undiminished head, then overcame one of those unsanctified 5.9 shells, and presently we were witnessing the ungodly sight of the lorry set, the steel mast, the umbrella aerial, and the 3 operators being shot skyward to various points of the compass. Presumably they have descended since, but I saw no evidences of their fall. They were scattered too far and wide to leave any traces. Thus was the captious gentleman answered out of the mouth of the enemy guns. So we resumed our tiresome chain of ever larger wireless sets, and saved ourselves much expense and many lives. The fickle masters of my destiny suddenly deciding that I had rested sufficiently long at Roquetoire, I was soon taking a hasty and none too reluctant farewell of that village and its many red-tabbed visitors. My orders were to proceed south to a brigade situated somewhere near Albert. I set out under a glorious sky on a very good road, and my instructions allowing some elasticity of interpretation in the matter of time, I made no haste to reach the scene of unpleasant action. The theatre of war had no attractions for me now. The set pieces had gone stale, and such surprises as it staged at times were not of a nature calculated to allure. At St. Paul, an old stamping ground, I delayed till the last minute. But soon the 70-odd miles that separated me from my station had sped by under the smooth wheels of my all too swift car. So here I am again, supernumerary signal officer, still attached to a unit that I may not claim as my own. Oh, the joys of the tourist, à la Cook! I am to assist the Brigade Signal Officer with the telephonic communications. But as these consist mainly in superintending the wiring of places that are very seldom shelled and more seldom hit, or the receiving of messages concerning the company's foot and underwear, I am liable to have much leisure on my hands. My masters, however, have foreseen such a contingency, and duly forestalled any designs that His Satanic Majesty might have had on my idle hands. Our radio system being still far from perfect, I am to devote my odd moments to experimentation with the same. Those odd moments are more easily counted as hours. The Boche is behaving with extraordinary restraint, and we are most carefully doing nothing to provoke his sleeping wrath. To one accustomed to a war atmosphere blue with smoke and shrill with screams, there is something uncanny in the calm monotony that characterises activities down here. There is the same routine in the trenches so far as the Tommies are concerned. 4 days in billets, 4 along the line, rising at "stand to" in the dim, grey dawn, filling sandbags, cleaning rifles, taking a turn at listening post. An occasional excursion across no man's land when the night is dark and the enemy quietly at rest stirs the blood and makes a break in the monotony. But even these sallies rarely result in a real scrap. The object is rather to avoid such a clash, and the hope merely to take some unwary prisoner from whom we may elicit information regarding his superior's plans. For the rest, there is the waiting, endless, hopeless. For what? Heaven only knows. Poker proves a preventative for many a fit of the blues. Cursing is the safety valve, if the fit gets fastened on one. There is some desultory betting on the direction of the shells between gamblers whom the chance of being hit does not even excite. Bet you the next one gets that old stump, challenges Jones. His chum, as a kindness, takes him on. Bet you it hits the heap of stones. But so long has one to wait for it to hit anywhere that the bet is all but forgotten when it falls. Some men of more domestic, or more greedy, natures turn their attention to the inner man. In my strolls through the trenches I come on some of these venturesome people trying to vary the monotony of bully beef by devices learned, presumably, from Nature herself. A little strategy and foresight exerted when in billets provides the wherewithal for the experiments. When one knows how to handle Madame, the redoubtable, the parsimonious, one may gather such luxuries as potatoes or eggs with which to swell the regular larder. For instance, a sack of the former may be extracted as the price for cutting up her stock of precious wood, or mending her windows removed suddenly by a shell, or finding tarpaulin to cover the air holes in her roof. And with potatoes one may concoct that delectable dish known on the line as cottage pie. A layer of bully chopped fine, overlaid by a layer of potatoes mashed to a pulp, the whole baked in a mess tin over a fire bucket. That is a recipe to be relished by any regular. It was the smell of it that lured an unlucky private one day from his traverse into a neighbouring one where it was cooking. It was dinner hour, 12 a.m. in the trenches. His meal was the bully and biscuits cold, so he decided, evidently, to cadge if he could. "Cottage pie, hev ye?" he said casually, strolling up to the 6 fortunate Tommies who were sitting round their fire bucket, devouring it. "My eye, but some blokes is lucky. Where did ye get the spuds?" "Back in the billets, old dear." A long pause through which the visitor waited patiently. "Hev a bit." It came at last, with reluctance. People should provide their own luxuries, or do without. The tardiness of the invitation, however, in no wise discouraged the intruder. "I don't mind if I do," he decided, sitting down. A long silence, broken only by such sounds as are not prescribed in the books of etiquette to accompany a man's meals. Then suddenly the silences were broken. The Boche chooses unfortunate times to get busy. There was a prolonged hiss quite close to the ear, a bang, followed by a cloud of smoke, and up spattered the earth over our 7 silent friends, covering them with stray bits of mud. A "pipsqueak" had hit the trench. In a second it was all over. Recovering, they looked round, and at the end of the traverse they saw the visitor lying sidewise, a mess tin still clutched in his hands. "Got his," commented one man, who had gone to turn him over. "Why the hell didn't he stay where he belonged?" Even with a surplus on our hands, we waste no time on sentimentality. Callousness does not necessarily decrease with the size of the casualty list. Ours is a very small one indeed. For days not a single case will come into the casualty clearing station, a happy change from those times when we had 60,000 in less than a week. Sometimes it is the Boche laxity, and sometimes a lucky chance that saves the life on our side. One day, suffering, I suppose, from a sudden attack of the old hate, the gentleman sent 280 shells flying into the little village of Bienvillers, which is a few kilos away from our quarters, and not a single soul did he send to heaven. But another evening he hurled a Big Bertha, just one solitary piece of explosive, right into the middle of the square. He timed it and aimed it well, for we were holding a band concert at the moment, and all the happy, harmless villagers were disporting themselves in the open. 30 dead and more wounded was the toll that shell took. Such are the unpleasant surprises on the line. But on the whole we have no reason to complain, for which we have to thank our friends, the Saxons. They, we are assured on good authority, are our opponents on this particular part of the line, an amiable race, judging from their attitude towards us. We ascribe those sudden fits of temper to the arrival of visiting Prussian officers, grim gentlemen with a fondness for fireworks. Meantime, we are discovering the virtues and vices of our new radio system of communications. We had begun by using a perpendicular aerial, which stuck its head rather too prominently over the parapet, thereby incurring all the hardships and hazards that had made life insecure for our old cable. Occasionally it stood for days, but this was due to the Boche indifference. When they woke up, its short span was measured in minutes. A most undependable contrivance, but we had taken no risks with it as yet, and we had leisure to look for a substitute. This was presently evolved in the form of ground aerials that, lying along the earth, were practically indistinguishable and therefore as safe a system as could be found. A very excellent thing, indeed, we found Mr. Marconi's invention, when adapted to our peculiar requirements. Its chief charm, of course, lay in its extreme simplicity, a quality which, unfortunately, acted as a boomerang at times. Put it in the hands of an experienced gentleman, operating behind our lines, with the object not of helping but of hindering us, and its charm took on a different aspect. There were many of these gentlemen in the old days in France. Most ingenious and elusive people they proved to be. Disturbing stories of their versatility used to float towards us at times, borne on those strange news currents that spring up along the line. Positive genius characterises some of their activities. The palm in this particular goes, I think, to the individual whose tale I am now going to tell. There was a subaltern on our side, a youngster just out, who was suffering from a bad attack of souvenir mania. The malady being rather general, he was for ever in danger of having a curio pinched from his collection. Consequently, when he became possessed of a Boche rifle and bayonet, he made haste to put it in safe hiding. For this purpose he chose the chimney of his billet bedroom, whence hangs the thread of this tale. Putting his hand up the chimney to find a resting place for the butt of his rifle, he was surprised to find it touching a pole of bamboo. He pulled. The pole came, then stuck, and no pulling could bring it any farther. Being curious by nature, as well as by training, he determined to investigate, which led him to the roof. It was a typical roof of a French provincial house, flat, with a chimney protruding at each end and a slight elevation of the wall above the gutter. The first thing to catch his eye when he reached it was a set of wires lying close to the surface. One ran from chimney to chimney. It was an open wire. The other, which was insulated, adjoined this at right angles at the centre and ran toward the side of the house. The first wire, he found on closer inspection, stretched not only up to, but into the chimney, running up its side in a neatly made groove. He gave it a tug, and up came a bamboo pole. It took very few seconds for him to reach the street. He was young and extremely excited. He was in a hurry to find somebody in authority to whom he might report, and, by good luck, came on a staff officer walking through the town. "I wonder if you could give me a moment, sir," he began breathlessly saluting, "to come up to my roof. There's dirty work, I think, sir, being done there." "Oh," said the red-tabbed one, not particularly excited. He had heard such breathless tales before. "And what might it be?" "An aerial, sir, so far as I can judge." "Good lud! Come along, let's have a look." They went off together, and were presently on the roof. "You're right, sonny," said the officer after a few seconds' inspection. "That's what it is. I wonder where's the rest. Now, you follow that wire." He pointed to the one that was insulated. "That's the feeding wire for this aerial, I should say." The boys set to work. He found that the wire entered a drain at the back of the house, reappeared at the bottom, then vanished through the wall. So far it was easy, but no rummaging seemed to unearth the rest. Where the dickens was the instrument? Finally he decided that there was nothing for it but to dig through. This process performed, he found himself in a cellar, and also at the end of his search. For here, buried deep under a pile of dirt and straw, was a very neat, very complete German wireless apparatus. It was even equipped with a zinc box round the spark gap to prevent any crackling of the transmissions being heard. Said the staff officer. "And who the devil works this? Run and fetch me Monsieur what d'ye call 'em, the owner of your billet, my boy." After 20 minutes' search, the boy returned. "Can't find him, sir, and no one seems to know where he has gone. They're so stupid. Don't seem to understand me." So far as I know, no one has found him since. He was a short, stocky gentleman with a bullet head and shrewd eyes. Contrary to all custom, it was now remembered he had offered no objections to excuses when they requisitioned his house, the best in the town and therefore the obvious billet for the officers. On the contrary, he had always exerted himself to make his guests cosy and comfortable. Though unobtrusive, he had been exceedingly attentive, which, perhaps, ought to have aroused suspicion. How he ever managed to hoist the aerial remains a mystery to this day. Probably he climbed out of his attic at dusk, when the officers were at the mess dining. But that is only guesswork. The rest is fact. Section 8